Hey everyone, SRN347 here, and for this video I'll be covering the top 5 best designed cards of Exodus TCG. And it has a lot of pretty well designed cards, but for the most part, let us take a look at what makes some of those cards so well designed and what some of the best ones are. At number 5, I'm going to go with Leech. Now, TBH, Leech doesn't really see much play anymore, but it has for a good portion of the game's existence. It has been around since set 1, and it was a staple up until, I would say, the start of set 5. And a big part of what made this such a strong staple is it was just such an efficient way to gain and destroy energy. Like, you're gaining one and they're losing one, so it is 2 points of energy, whereas usually you would get 1 for any given card at most. But that said, this card has its drawbacks. Like, it is all or nothing. If they don't have one for you to take, or you don't have a creature or pile to gain, you don't get an energy. And for that reason, this card has had a lot of counterplay over the years. Like, often if someone had just 1 energy, it would come down to who leeches first. If you have 1 energy and you leech, they chain their leech to make yours fizzle. Whereas if you held yours and they tried to leech your last energy, you could chain your leech and still get the effect. So lots of nuances like that led to Leech promoting skillful gameplay. Very technical card to use properly. Especially when Leaf Lore came into the equation. You can't target Leaf Lore with Leech as either player. It can't gain or lose energy that way. So a lot of the time that raised the skill ceiling of this card as well. It doesn't see play anymore, but it is still always an option if your deck really wants to just be more energy efficient. And yeah, I think that about covers it. At number 4, we have Crystal Cove. Now, in a lot of other collectible card games out there, in most other CCGs, you have some form of Omni-Negate, and Exodus doesn't really have that for the most part. And I think it's good design for this game that you don't really have that much generic negate and destroy any one card effects. You have Devourer, but that's about it. So you might be wondering, well then, why am I saying a card that does negate basically any symmetry is a well-designed card? And the answer is partly due to how it does so. Like, you're not even fully negating it really, you're delaying it. Pay 1 energy to freeze an opponent's symmetry. At the end of their next turn, it'll unfreeze and reactivate in their end phase. Like, that right there is a pretty well designed way to actually implement negation into the game. You still have to deal with the card. If they play like a leech or an unsummon or something and you cove it, well, they're still gonna resolve their removal later. But for now, you have another turn to prepare for it and play around it. Sometimes even messing with the timing is beneficial to you. Like, if you cove their Vortex, that's actually better than if you just straight up negated it, because they're going to make you draw 3 cards in their end phase. So going into your turn, you'll have 6 cards to work with. If you cove their Cove, obviously in their next end phase, their Cove will probably fizzle because there won't be any targets at that time for them to cove. So lots of nuances like that. Great card in general for counterplaying against all sorts of decks, like even against all symmetry. You can freeze their Repel the Thoughtstream in response to their draw card like Morningstar, and then it unfreezes in their next end phase and then dies because it stays in play until the end phase. So yeah. Moving on to number 3, we have Vernesius, the Molecular Mockery. Now, this card isn't just here because it has a well-balanced effect, although TBH it does. Discard 1 card to negate and steal a creature's ability once per turn is a strong but fair effect But the reason I'm praising this card for being so well designed is because it is treated as every creature type, not just while in play, but in all zones, hand, deck, graveyard. Not at deck building, though. You still can't run this in your archive decks because it's not an archive at deck building. But the fact that throughout the game it is all creature types at all times leads to it being usable in so many different like tribal decks. You can run it in Hailfires. It won't break your Brimstone. It's addable by Lavasis. In fact, in response to his own summon, he can discard to copy a creature with an on-summon ability like Lavasis and trigger its effect. You can also search and rebuild into it with Navigator. That's always a useful option in the machine toolbox. So yeah, all around it basically is the antithesis to Hailfire and Brimstone from the last video. I criticized that card for making its archetype too xenophobic. Well, this card does the exact opposite. It makes archetypes less xenophobic. This is a card you can splash from outside of its intended archetype, Chronos, into other stuff. At number 2, we have Anathema. Now, for those of you not familiar with this card, it is a highly unconventional card. This may require some explanation. It is a two-sided card, which limits you to one copy because it has its name printed twice on the same card. That's how they decided to rule it. The gist of what you need to know from this card is it adds 2 energy to one of your creatures or underneath your main deck, deals 1 damage to all non-chrono creatures, and while this card exists in a public knowledge zone, like on the stack or in the graveyard, it prevents all life point changes except from creatures attacking directly. This is considered its creature effect, but it does not need to enter play as a creature to apply the effect. You just play it as a symmetry. The ability is active. And I think this was Existence Games' intentional design to add counterplay to burn strategies like all symmetry. It can also be used to counter various life point paying strategies like Manuscript and Carcery. All in all, it can do a lot of great things. You could even run it to turn off your own Eventide field. If you have the one that when a player would die, their life points go to 1. Just play Anathema and they can't set their life points from 0 to 1 when they die. Or hold it in your hand if you're the one who's about to die and you want it to trigger. If you're not facing any life point based strategies, well, this isn't really a dead card. You're not really that unhappy to see it. Like, it basically just becomes Leech at that point. Your creature gains 2 energy but loses 1 because it's presumably not a Chrono, so you only gain 1, and their creatures lose 1. That's basically a Leech. I don't know why more people aren't splashing this card. You could even search it with Sign of the Crow if you really wanted to, although outside of Chronos you generally don't want to run Sign of the Crow just for that. And finally, at number 1, you might be wondering what card could possibly occupy the number 1 spot in a game with such good design. I will tell you now, it is Unsummon. Yes, this spot removal card has been a staple ever since set 1, and it has never really gotten out of hand. It's never really been overpowered, because, I mean, you can play around it. No one's forcing you to put all your energy into 1 stack. Unsummon hitting a 3 stack is actually pretty rare these days. Usually you're hitting a 2 stack with it. Although sometimes a creature gets arbitrarily large energy levels, like an Eventide field or a Colossus. It generates a bunch of energy and then, ooh, you are so glad to have that unsummon in your deck. Otherwise, I don't know how you expect to deal with that huge stack. Just manually attack into it with a bunch of small creatures. That'll never get you there. But yeah, Unsummon is one of the few true spot removal cards this game has. Like, if you kill a creature or bounce it with Reversion or something, you haven't really removed anything because the energy is still there. So unless you kill them in 1 turn, Like, they're going to use that stack of energy for a creature again. And there aren't really a lot of other cards to fulfill that same role as Unsummon. There's Tethered to Eventide, but if I had a nickel for every time I've seen that card resolve with effect, I wouldn't even have one nickel. You can even run Unsummon in a deck that runs an Eventide field, and you're prepared for when your opponent awakens it, if they ever do. Because you do need to have a plan for that. Your Eventide field can be used against you. On rare occasions, you will find yourself unsummoning your own creature, which is kind of a bad reversion, but when it is in fact correct to go for it, you're never really that disappointed that it's a worse reversion. You're just glad to have it at that point. So yeah, that has been my top 5 best designed cards for Exodus TCG. Let me know if there's any cards you agree or disagree with, or anything you feel should have been included here. I have been SRN347, and I will see you later.